Thank you all.
If you could go ahead and give us an overview of your report and key points, and then I think we'll turn it over to question and answer afterwards.
That sounds great. Our firm undertook this study for several states in order to help policymakers make informed decisions with regard to the federal stimulus money that's being offered to the states. We found, not surprisingly to us, that historically federal government spending and increasing it has never stimulated the economy. In fact, it's destimulated the economy by diminishing the private economy. Why does it do it? Because the driving force in the economy is the incentive to engage in market activities, and higher government spending needs to be financed through higher taxes today or higher borrowing, which means even higher taxes tomorrow. That lowers the private sector's after-tax rate of return and provides them disincentives to save, invest, and add jobs to the economy. One thing that you're hearing from Washington is, that this government spending, this temporary increase in government spending is going to create jobs. Well, in fact, it might create some temporary government jobs, but that statement ignores where the funding for those jobs, those temporary government jobs, are coming from. And in order for the government to spend money, it needs to take it from somebody. Understand that government does not create anything. It merely redistributes wealth. So when government spends $1, it takes $1 from a taxpayer or a tax-paying entity, and those are the taxpayers and tax-paying entities that create jobs, save, and invest, and are motivated by their after-tax rate of return. So any jobs that may be created temporarily by government are going to be overwhelmed by the loss of jobs and potentially permanent loss of jobs in the private economy. You hear a lot in Washington about GDP. Just a quick basic economics lesson. Those of you who had Economics 101 probably learned that the definition of GDP includes government spending. So by definition, if you want to immediately increase GDP, you can increase government spending and immediately increase that equation. But eventually, you're going to lose private sector activity and more than wipe out any of those gains. I like to use the example of my household budget, where if I want to immediately increase the money in my wallet to spend from all sources, I can go and borrow from my credit card. But eventually what's going to happen? I'm going to have to reduce spending somewhere else, borrow, reduce spending in the future to levels that were lower than they were when I started my credit card spree. What we use for our firm is a much better indicator, and our report shows, going back to the 50s, that this is the case, much better indicator of what government spending does to jobs in the economy. We use what we call the government expenditure wedge, and that is by definition, it's government spending divided by net private sector output, net domestic business output. Right now, those levels are approaching 50%, which is almost historic highs. We have found, going back to the 1950s, that the government wedge not only drives jobs up and down when the government wedge moves up or down, but also the higher the levels, the more sensitive. And you can see in Figure 7 in the report that there has always been a very direct and inverse relationship to the size of the government expenditure wedge and net private domestic output, private sector activity. That means that when government spending grows, jobs are lost on a net basis in the economy. In 2007, our government wedge in this country was about 46%, and then after all the spending began on the other stimulus packages, we've now risen to about 49%. Our estimate is that the ARRA stimulus package is going to drive that wedge up to 52.5%, or a 3.25% increase in the wedge, which will result in a 2.5% loss to the private economy, and that equates nationwide to 1.7 million jobs lost. In Ohio, we estimate that that could be up to 90,000 jobs lost, in addition to those that are lost due to the recession. Now, we talked about, temporary and permanent jobs. Lawmakers and governors are faced with very difficult decisions at this time. There are some things that they can do to improve this. If Ohio does not spend the stimulus funds to permanently increase the size of government, and if the size of government reduces and Ohio's government expenditure wedge goes back down to pre-stimulus levels after the federal money is gone, those 90,000 jobs will not be permanently lost. So that's the summary of the report. I'd be happy to take questions about it.
Why don't you ask her to explain about the unemployment insurance situation, and that particular part of the report I thought was pretty interesting. It's a kind of tangible, specific issue that many employers in Warren County are probably pretty concerned about, but is not so widely appreciated by voters.
Okay. Did you hear that, Donna?
The unemployment insurance?
Yes.
Yes. We focused specifically on the unemployment insurance, at least the Part 2 portion of the stimulus package, as the prime example of the stimulus funds that, first of all, we're recommending that states and local governments reject completely. And that's because when you look back historically, unemployment insurance supplements by the federal government have always resulted in higher state payroll taxes on a permanent basis after the federal government took its money away. In addition to that, like some of the cases in the past, a portion of those funds come with significant strings attached, as you probably all know, and require a permanent increase, expansion of your program at your state. I'd say the third reason is going back to incentives and after-tax rate of returns. If the federal government is taking money from a taxpayer and lowering their incentives to save, invest, and create jobs, and giving it to a state not necessarily to create a job, but in fact to incentivize somebody to become or remain unemployed, you're going to have a further destabilizing impact on your economy. So if you look at the charts with regard to Ohio, you can see that in the past, following the pattern of the federal government, unemployment insurance supplements have always resulted in higher state payroll taxes, and particularly in those times when strings are attached that require you to permanently expand your program. So we recommended rejecting those dollars. Some of the stimulus package has more strings on it than others, and we definitely recommend giving higher scrutiny to those that have the strings.